Okay, so starting off with the usual introduction. So for everyone that doesn't know me, hi, my name is Dean Lewis. I'm a technical account manager working for VMware based in the UK, looking after the UK and Ireland. My career focus over the years has been networking, virtualization and EUC, which is good since today I'm going to talk to you about Horizon on VMC. Outside of work, I'm a keen scuba diver. I'm currently struggling with trying to get my daily steps over roughly 100 a day at the moment, going between the fridge, my couch and my office. If you want to follow along today, all of the information, because I do share quite a few links in here, then if you go to vexpert.me/VMC-Horizon, that will actually take you to the supplementary blog post that I wrote about this as well. So all of the links that are in this deck are on that blog post. You can also find me on Twitter at SaintDLE. So we're going to look at the overview of the Horizon options when we look at hosting it outside of our private data center, look at the supported architectures that are available, the feature support, talk about identity management, and actually a couple of other things on top of that, which is more platform management, things that you need to think about, and then really focus on networking and security as well. So as a little bit of a start of 10, when we talk about Horizon 7 on VMware Cloud and AWS, it's not a desktop as service offering. So on the left-hand side, we have a description of the model, which essentially showing you that the VMware Cloud and AWS offering is a VMware managed service. So the VMware platform is managed for you. However, everything you deploy on top of that then is your infrastructure service, so you manage that yourself. So everything we talk about today in relation to Horizon 7 on VMC and AWS is going to be managed by yourselves as an administrator and as a company as well. If you are looking towards a desktop as a service type model, then we do also offer that as VMware. And you can either have Horizon Cloud on soft layer or as part of Azure. When we look at deploying this, there's essentially two ways that you can consume the Horizon 7. You can interlink it with an existing Horizon deployment that runs on-prem, and you would use the CloudPod architecture to scale the different data centers for that. And it would actually feel and interact the same as if you were creating CloudPod architectures between your own private cloud environments. Alternatively, and some of the things we're going to look at today, especially if we get time to kind of show you my lab, you can just run this holistically within VMC and not have to rely on an existing Horizon environment that runs in your private data center as well. However, not everything's equal when we look at VMware Cloud and AWS. So we have a KB article which goes into depth around feature support. And for those of you that have used Horizon in the past, there's a couple of key features that we don't support when we run Horizon on VMC. So the first and foremost, and the biggest feature for me, having a background of EUC, is we only support the instant clone technology in VMC, which for me actually is a good thing. View Composer, linked clones, is a great technology, has lasted for many years, but it's also very complex and has its own requirements in terms of an SQL server to write to as a database. It's another service that the Horizon components will speak to deploy the virtual desktops on top of a platform. And also gives you something else to troubleshoot if it goes wrong. Whereas the instant clone features, it removes the need to have a separate service that writes to an SQL database to deploy desktops. It uses the VM fork technology that was introduced in, I think, vSphere 6, maybe vSphere 5. Somebody possibly could keep me honest in the chat on that one. We also don't support things like vVols because we don't have vVols accessibility on top of vSAN within VMC. And we do support the just-in-time Horizon access as well, but you would need to use the Horizon Cloud Console for that. We won't go too much into detail around that feature today. And on this list as well, just another one to call out as well is the use of security servers. So security service is a Windows installable. So you'd have to, for external connectivity into your environment, you would stand up a Windows server into your DMZ. You would then install a Horizon security service and then harden it and protect it. A few years ago, VMware changed that architecture and we released the Unified Access Gateway instead, which is a hardened Linux appliance with that software already installed in for you. So realistically, you know, it's the latest and greatest, it's the preferred option. So the support there when you're using our VMC offering is to also use the more preferred options around that architecture as well. We do have a full reference architecture, which takes you through in depth of what the minimal viable product is to start a deployment that's usable for users for Horizon on VMC. It's quite easy to find. So here's something I prepared earlier. So I think we'll have to share my screen again. So it's good applications. So if you go to our cloud.vmware.com, you can then find the Horizon page under products. And then once you're on there, if you then click the resources tab, then click reference architectures, you'll have to find a number of reference architectures, but obviously the one today we're interested in is the Horizon 7. And then there's a full PDF which takes you through the architecture diagrams, explain all of the components. And we also have some supplementary PDF guides about how to deploy the Horizon environment as well. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. For if we get the chance for the demos, for my Horizon architecture I've deployed today is very, very simple. It actually maps to the reference architecture for using AVI networks for load balancing as well. So we've deployed AVI networks in our DMZ and in our LAN environment. Two UAGs, which provide us the external security services access to our connection brokers, and then obviously our internal virtual desktops as well. We have deployed Active Directory service with DHCP, file shares, and Dynamic Environment Manager, which you may previously have known as UEM, so Unified Environment, User Environment Manager. And this is quite a small setup that I'll show you today. And essentially, I'm not really going to focus too much on the using and the configuration of Horizon itself, because it's really, really simple. The reason why that arrow was there kind of misplaced on the animation is because the only difference once you've deployed your components for Horizon is when you connect Horizon to the vCenter so that it can deploy desktops or RDS farms, is you click the little box which says VMware Cloud and AWS, and that's it. That helps Horizon understand that there is a limited permissions role set with the VMC offering versus a on-prem, fully self-managed vCenter. Everything else that we're going to talk about today is kind of really the considerations and constraints that typically would be in place regardless whether it's Horizon or another software stack that you're going to stand up in a VMC environment. So first and foremost, platform management. So identity management is really key, and that proximity to Active Directory is something that needs to be thought out first and foremost. Are you going to be extending an on-site Active Directory and using AD replication? At minimum, you should be thinking of a read-only domain controller in there, especially for locality, but also kind of think about DR resources as well if you do lose the connectivity to your on-prem site. You need to configure your sites and services correctly as well for this to work. It's all well and good standing up an Active Directory server in your VMC environment, but misconfigurations from the basics of Active Directory can mean that you're still not using that Active Directory controller. File shares. So VDI really isn't, people ask why it's the year of VDI. And for me, it's kind of not been the year of VDI now for many years. It's actually changed. It's the year of VUC, which is end user and the end user experience. So proximity again to file shares is key for that user's desktop, their usual accessing their documents, their application data being local to them as well, so that when they spin up applications such as Firefox, all of their bookmarks are synchronized. For user documents, kind of consider, I would say, the Windows offering, so distributed file servicing, if you're stretching between on-prem and VMC. We also support in the reference architecture using Amazon FX for Windows file server if you wanted to store them files in native AWS services and then pass them through into your software-defined data center. For user profiles, again, you can highly configure them using Dynamic Environment Manager, which then also maybe removes the need for moving all the contents of a user profile. But we also do support user profile context systems such as the Microsoft FS Logics as well, which is actually designed for containerizing user profiles for use in non-persistent environments. And then finally, image management. So Horizon doesn't use the content library, which is a big problem because how do you, if you're stretching your Horizon environment from on-prem to VMC, Horizon looks at a virtual machine which is listed as an object with snapshots so that it can build its image from that golden image for your pool. So one of the things that you may have to do is work around how to copy that data between both virtual centers. So you could copy the virtual machine into your local content library on your on-prem environment, synchronize the content library across to your Horizon infrastructure environment that's sat in VMC. But then one of the extra steps that you would need to do as part of your standard operating procedures is to then deploy that VM so that Horizon can actually use it. And as part of deploying that VM, you're going to need to snapshot it again as well. Alternatively, you could run separate golden images in each environment. However, that then brings its own challenges because when you update your golden images, you're going to have to do that in lockstep. So there's going to be some adaptation to your standard operating procedures from how you manage images, especially when you're sharing them across an on-prem and cloud environment such as VMC. Okay, so looking at networking and security, it's really simple. We need a couple of different network segments. At minimum, we need a LAN segment, and we also need to create some sort of DMZ. Depending on your architecture, if you're using load balancing, you may create extra segments. In my lab environment, we've got 3. Typically, the reference architecture would actually ask you to create 2 DMZ segments, one which is an external DMZ and one which is the internal DMZ, so that that virtual machine is sat in the middle for when you're connecting things like the unified access gateways. We also need to think about load balancing as well. So currently within VMC, we don't offer any load balancing services which are exposed by the NSX that you have as part of your VMC environment. So at the moment, VMC is a bring your own load balancer solution. There's a lot of different solutions out there that will run perfectly fine. But again, understanding which solution you want to use in its architecture is key. If you're using global load balancing, so you have multiple SDDCs, maybe located around the world, and you're using things like cloud pod architecture for that, you can use AWS Route 53, which is a supported methodology. If you're just wanting to do local load balancing to your to one SDDC, you can still use Route 53. We also support cloud native services such as the AWS Elastic Load Balancers. Or of course, we have our own technology, which we purchased last year. So Avi Networks as well. We also have a reference architecture for that. And in the diagrams there, we kind of just showing you the difference. So this was wrote from a fantastic blog post by Nicholas Fever, who works for ourselves. At the top here, we have using the AWS Elastic Load Balancer. So as you can see, it's coming from a native customer VPC, so it's native services within AWS, and then being passed through into the SDDC, which is again another VPC within VMC itself. And at the bottom, we have actually deployed Avi Networks instead, which runs all within our SDDC. We need to think about the firewall and routing within our SDDC itself, but we don't have to think about the connectivity to another VPC. And then finally, DHCP is also key. So DHCP options within VMC at the moment are very limited. You have the ability to set up a DHCP relay to a server which can run DHCP services, so info blocks, or even running it off a Windows server, which is perfectly acceptable to do. Alternatively, if you're quite happy with using the DHCP offerings within VMC, but you do need some considerations around your Horizon environment that you're running there. Then you can set up a DHCP server running on one of your domain controllers, a separate Windows servers, and then only run it on the subnet that you need. So for example, in my environment, we've actually only running DHCP on the same subnet that we're running our remote desktop services pool. And then we don't use DHCP services for anything else in the environment. It's all statically assigned. And one of the reasons for that consideration is because with the limited options DHCP within VMC, we don't have the ability to change the lease that's given for a DHCP address, and we also can't expire that early. So if you're doing testing, for example, and you spin up a couple hundred desktops and spin them down, those DHCP addresses may not be released straight away, which could actually then impede your further testing. Whereas if you have a Windows box or a Linux box that you control, you can log into that and then expire those DHCP leases as you need. The real key thing that I found when I was setting up a lab and looking at the constraints considerations is around the security side of it for VMC. So we have two firewalls. We have the gateway firewall, which looks at north and south traffic. So this looks at everything entering and leaving the clusters and the workload running on top of the cluster to the outside world. So we have a gateway firewall, which is for our compute network on the edge. So we have something called the compute gateway, which is, hopefully you can see my mouse moving around there. We also have a gateway firewall for management services. This is how you give access to vCenter, for example, externally. But we need to configure this for our application service to be accessible from the outside, first and foremost. But if we only configure the gateway firewall, which gives us north and south, we have no way to create a DMZ type architecture. And this is where we have to use the distributed firewall. Using the distributed firewall within VMC is not part of the default offering. It is something you pay extra for. But the distributed firewall really takes advantage of that NSX feature set, which gives you the ability to control the east to west traffic, so virtual machines between virtual machines. And essentially, in the next slide on the demo, we are going to look at how to create the DMZ in the UAG environment. So we'll move to the demo, and when my sharing screen comes back, I'm going to change. So hopefully demo gods are going to be good for me, and my access token is not timed out. So as this loads, what we're going to look at now is I've obviously already deployed my Horizon services, but we're going to have a quick look at how the distributed firewall works. And essentially, it's nothing scary or different to how we usually understand a firewall from working. In the distributed firewall of VMC, you have the ability to create two things. You have the ability to create sections and new rules, and these are created in different placements. So we have some really good separate documentation on how to use the distributed firewall and how to use it in a reference architecture. Essentially, it's pretty self-explanatory. The firewall is runs through the rule set in a logical order, the same as any normal firewall if you've used Cisco ASAs, for example, or Sophos UTMs within your business, or even running them at home in your home labs. So we have the ability to set these rules in different areas so that you can control access from an emergency, get out of jail, for example, or block access to everything if you need to. Infrastructure level rules, so core infrastructure that's not going to change. Environmental rules for each maybe pod or environment that you've created within VMC for your applications. Actual application rules, so maybe thinking about the ports and access to particular web services, or in our case, agents for Horizon. And then as you can see, one of the key things and the reason why we're going to create these distributed firewall rules is because the default rule at the end is allow all. So if there is not a rule in place to block traffic to a certain service, it's going to be allowed anyway when it's processed by the firewall. So really, I think if I make that a little bit bigger for everyone, I've created a section which is basically focused around my UAG. I've given the access rules, so any traffic coming into the UAG, so this includes my external traffic, and I've defined my service ports in, so that's port 80, 443, and 8443, because I'm only interested in using the BLAST protocol, for example. But again, you can set this to include whatever services you need to at that moment in time. We go through, and I also have to specify load balance of traffic. So from my load balance services to my UAG, from my UAG's connections to my load balances as well. And I've typically just built this rule set up from the documentation that's available from VMware around how to deploy Horizon in the VMC environment. The key thing really to note is the ability to deny traffic at the end of this environment. So at the moment, I've allowed all and I've enabled that traffic. So we're going to edit this rule as well, but I'm creating two rules to create that DMZ on that segment where the UAGs sit. I have two ways to do this. So I can either target directly the VMs as destinations, or I can target the whole segment IP address range that we've created. That again is down to your own design decision. But I'm creating two rules, one which is deny all traffic going to the UAG. So if it's not specified in the rule set above, it's going to be denied. And also all traffic going from the UAG to anywhere else in the environment. So again, if it's not specified in the existing rules, the traffic can't enter the UAG and also can't leave the UAG services. So we drop that one, and drop this. I've also turned on enable logging, and we'll take a minute to look at that as well in what happens with the default logging that you get with Log Insight Cloud as part of your VMC instance, whether paid for or trial, or part of the free offering as well. And then I've created a quick test rule as well to show you kind of the distributed firewall in action. It's all pretty self-explanatory. So call it testing for today, and we're going to create any, so we're going to select the RDS farm that I'm connected to at the moment. So this particular group has already been pre-created and points at all members within my IP address range. And we're going to send this traffic to any of a particular set of services that we have set up already. So another IP address range. So at the moment, we're going to allow this traffic so that we can show it working. I've already logged into my Horizon environment. So we can see I get an authentication page when I want to connect to this particular Windows server. It's nothing groundbreaking. It's something we're all kind of used to. And if I cancel out of this, and that's because at the moment I have two segments set up within VMC. There's no security between the virtual machines that sit in those segments and the routed networks. Now, when I edit that rule, like any typical firewall that you're going to expect, it's now going to block that traffic. And it's really, really simple, and it doesn't take any additional complexity to understand that. But it is quite key as a fundamental from a security point of view when deploying your Horizon architecture in VMC for access. So I'm going to go back to the slides for now. So moving on, I think we're doing okay for time so far. I thought I'd wrap up with some final considerations. I don't think my animations worked on that slide. But kind of when I was deploying this in a lab environment and talking about it internally with colleagues, I was also finding out about what our customers are doing within VMC at the moment around the Horizon use case, but also about some of the lessons learned as well. So some things that kind of really stood out to me is we have a handful of customers even before COVID where they have an on-prem Horizon environment, it's running on aging hardware, and their plan is to spin up new hardware. But maybe they don't have the data center space for that, or they're actually looking at evacuating data center space. So using the managed service from VMware is perfect as a use case. So the first and foremost kind of question, if you have an existing on-prem Horizon environment, will you be using cloud pod architecture? Do Do you want them to be linked? And if you do, then you're going to need to keep the Horizon environments the same version. Or will you choose to run separate Horizon instances? And if that's the case, how will you define which Horizon service a user uses? Maybe, aside from the global pandemic today, it could be that when users are on site within your local offices, they use your on-prem environment. However, for users that are remote workers, you then point them to use the external environment. But again, getting that consistency between the user's files and their application data is going to be key, regardless of whether it's a cloud pod architecture or separate Horizon instances. And then starting to understand your constraints. How many users are you going to need to support based on your original use case? Understanding minimum, the VMC maximum. So what are soft limits, what are hard limits? How many hosts can you have per cluster? How many clusters per SDDC? Understanding the desktop to host ratio, because how many virtual machines are you going to be able to deploy per host? Do your users run intensive workloads? Do you have a number of users that, although they may all use general workload, which is maybe the Office suite and internet browsing, but maybe you have some users that want to support a multi-monitor setup and some users that don't. That again will affect your desktop to host ratio. And then finally, looking at your networking. What's your connectivity into VMC? If you're going to use an IPsec VPN from your on-prem to VMC, there's going to be an overhead on your traffic. So this overhead can also increase latency as well as it goes through the various networkings and also any physical device you have on site. That latency increase will also affect the protocols used for the desktop display. So whether you are using PC over IP or the BLAST protocol, for example, and that affects the end user experience. At the same time, an easy option maybe would be to throw direct connect at it. So you go out to an MPLS provider in your local country or geography, you purchase the ability to connect to their MPLS, and they have a direct connection up to VMC. They can offer, I think, 1 gig and 10 gig pipes as it stands today, which is fantastic. However, there is a high cost. So if you want to use direct connect, you really need to make sure that you're taking advantage of that full pipe. There's no point paying a high cost for a 10 gig pipe when you're only maybe supporting 20 or 30 users connecting to a VMC instance, Horizon instance in VMC, and the rest of the users are still focusing at the on-prem environment, for example. And if you are thinking of these considerations, what are some of the resolutions that you can put in place? So to reduce oversubscription of IPsec VPN tunnels, so this is the diagram that isn't quite showing up. So I think if I come out of this, delete that one, you're actually going to go through a transit VPC. So you would have your on-prem network. It's going to go through a transit VPC in AWS and then connect to your different VPCs, whether it's for native services within AWS or the SDDCs you've set up as part of VMware Cloud and AWS. So there will be contention between the connections between your VPCs and your SDDCs to your transit VPC and back to your on-prem network. But you can mitigate some of that risk by scaling out across multiple SDDCs, for example. It may not seem logical where you're not taking advantage of the full soft or hard limits of a individual SDDC, but if the network traffic is your weakest link of your environment, it may be the best option. And again, it doesn't have to be a complex environment. You could then still use multiple SDDCs and then use cloud pod architecture to join them together to give it the same environment feel to that end user. Okay, so I think we're doing quite well on time. I have planned to finish slightly early as well so that I can show anything in an active demo or take questions. There is a number of links again, but mainly if you only want to go to one link, if you go to theexpert.me/VMC-Horizon, that will take you to my supplementary blog post, which lists all of these resources. And these final links here that we talked about today are actually at the very bottom of that blog post as well. Okay, any questions, queries, or would anybody like to see anything from a technical point of view? Oh, wow, I've stunned everyone to silence. Does that mean I achieved a session better than Kat did?
I have a quick question. I recently did VDI environment. I helped out with one. I was using AWS load balancers to get to the VMC deployed UAGs. So I thought about elastic load balancers, but then elastic load balancers can't address anything in VMC. They have to be in AWS, then the target group. So I went for an application load balancer, which is just 443. Now, you could possibly think about network load balancers, but then when you say that, you know, it has been successfully done, are there any publicly available blog posts that actually specifically show how to be it to be done? Because I didn't think that was possible with an elastic load balancer.
So to be completely honest with you, Arthur, the answer is I have not done with elastic load balancing myself to a Horizon environment. So off the top of my head, I don't know if there is an article on that. I can go away and ask and find out for you, or even look into it myself to see if we can make it work. We do have some documents on our cloud.vmware.com/community, which go through load balancing options and does discuss using the elastic load balancing services from native services into an SDC as well.
Yeah, I think what happens is that if you use it just with RDP, then yes, the the ALB works fine. If you need blast and PC over IP as well, then ALB won't work for you. I found a way. I just basically just pointed the UAGs through the VMC side of things, and that traffic comes in, and that works. I'm just saying that, you know, if there is a better way of doing it.
Yeah. So obviously, in my environment, I actually used AV Networks for setting up load balancers, which again, you know, it is paid for, and it's not, you know, in terms of using it versus turning on a service in AWS isn't going to be quite as easy, and possibly a different procurement method within the customer site. But the AV Networks was quite easy to set up. There's reference architecture for both using AV Networks in VMC and for Horizon as well. It's I nearly documented the step-by-steps of how to do it, then realised I was copying the AV Networks guides on that.
Yeah, Simon, I've seen that, just to quickly say that, I've seen that document as well. That doesn't actually in practice work.
Oh, does it not? Oh, right.
No.
We need to get a documentation.
I've seen pretty much all the documents,
in, don't we?
I've read all of them. Yeah, it practically doesn't work because, I mean, like I said, RDP will work. It's just that when you go to PC over IP and blast, then that's when you have a problem. Unless you deploy the UAGs in AWS, in which case you can target them and then go crazy on all the protocols.
So that is good feedback, Adher. So one of the things I will do is I will investigate that after today, and I will take it to our EUC team as well. That document is there, but it doesn't actually work. So I will try and set this up on my lab environment as an evidence. So actually doing the session is really good just for that feedback as well.
That'll be good. I'll be interested to know what you find in the end.
By all means, for anyone else listening on the call, there are other load balancers available outside of the REST load balancers and the AV Networks load balancer that I've discussed today. Yeah. You know, if you want a little bit of a personal spin on it, one of the ones that I'd recommend to look at is when I was a delivery consultant for a reseller. We used a load balance service called Jet Nexus, which is some little OVAs. Really, really cheap to purchase, really, really good, works quite well. How well they'd work in a full-scale enterprise environment, I'm not too sure, but it's just another name to throw out there that you can look into.
Cool. Thanks, Dean. That was really interesting. We've got any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes before Dave starts, otherwise.
It's okay. We can all go back to Catherine and asking Catherine more questions.
Yeah, that's right. Because we're actually trying to figure out how to make someone share because it's having a bit of a moment. So yeah, feel free to have that discussion while I try and fix this.
Right, Catherine, back over to you to put you on the spot.
She had to disappear to do some customer work.
Oh, terrible.
Dean, was the installation of Horizon on the VMC platform, was it straightforward? Did everything just sort of click and work from, you know, the integration to AVI and VMC and Horizon? Was it all fairly straightforward, or were there any sort of stumbling blocks, lessons to pick up and share?
Not really. It's because you're deploying it as infrastructure as a service in the same way that you do it on-prem. It looks and feels the exact same. There is no different. There's no separate software code for this. You are using the same code you would deploy on-prem. So when I log into this environment, you are, I'm going to have to run password for this now. You're not going to, it doesn't really tell you it's a VMC environment, for example, when you look at Horizon. Like all good demos, obviously doesn't log in straight away. So it is literally just that tick box that I showed before when you're adding the vCenter, which lets it know it's a VMC environment. Go on, log in. There we go. Everything else looks the same. You know, you get I've deployed 7.12, so I've got the slightly newer, better looking interfaces, for example. The only difference is going to be is you don't have the option to connect, see my settings, and if I go to servers, I don't have the option to connect, I've got the word for it now, the Composer service, for example. So it says there, do not use Composer. It should be grayed out. So you can connect it, but it's not going to work because the Composer service, if you set up a standalone Composer service, for example, so it's not integrated with vCenter, when Composer tries to talk to VMC, it's not going to have the permissions to do linked clones, for example, so it's not going to work. When you are setting up some of your different pools, there are certain options that are not available when you do that based on that feature set. Everything else looks and feels the same. You know, a lot of the considerations when you boil it down, like the network considerations, those network considerations are the same as if you were joining two of your on-prem data centers together and trying to span the Horizon environment between them both. What's the latency? Are you using VPNs? Are you putting an overhead on your network by using VPNs? Do you want to terminate directly on the internet? How are users going to access? Are they using thin clients? Are they using multi-monitor thin clients? Everything else feels really the same, which is good in a way because it means you don't have to relearn something else.
Yeah, and with this configuration, you can target multiple infrastructure layers, right? So you're targeting the VMC platform there, but if you wanted to target an on-prem infrastructure here as well, you could just...
Yeah, so again, you know, I'm running two connection brokers up in Horizon, up in VMC at the moment. You could if you had connectivity from this virtual machine that's running Horizon, it could connect to an on-prem environment where there are another vCenter running. You could just type it in and it'll all work as long as your infrastructure is set up from DNS and connectivity point of view. However, the recommended architecture wouldn't be to have your connection servers only in VMC. You would scale out the architecture so that you have connection servers in each of your environments that you're connected to. The same again with you know, your load balancing solution, for example. The biggest decision to make is if you already have an existing Horizon environment, do you want to connect them together? The answer is yes. You're going to have to deploy the same software on both sides, same Horizon environment. So the footprint gets bigger. If you are deploying it as separate environments, standalone instances, and not using the cloud pod architecture, that's great. But then how do you differentiate the users accessing that? Because there is going to be two different endpoints for them to connect to when they open up their Horizon client or they're using a thin client, whether it's at home or in the workplace.
So you have to give that policy a lot more thought then, if you were going to connect on-premise and cloud and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.